Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. But one day, this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody.
Hello, welcome to Live at Lane. I'm Keyontae Wallace.
And I'm Chardonnay Gray.
And today, this is the episode about MLK, his assassination on April 4th, 1968.
Today with us, we have our wonderful president, Dr. Hampton. We have Dr. Rogers, and Dr. Goldmon. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Thank you.
Now, could you guys give us a little brief bio about you guys and what brought you to Lane College?
Well, I'll yield to the lady first.
I actually came to Lane in 2009 to serve as assistant professor of religion. My doctoral work is in theology and culture, but I did my undergraduate work at Howard University in mathematics. So I was excited to join the faculty at Lane College in 2009. And after that, I served as division chair and then the vice president for academic affairs. And then I was gone from the college for 3 years and returned this past fall to serve as the interim VP for academic affairs. So I'm happy to be here.
Ooh, math, you know.
I'm Moses Goldmon. I'm a native of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I have a bachelor's degree in health and physical education from the University of Arkansas at Monticello, a master's in sports management, a doctorate in public health education, and a second master's in religious education. I've been married to Dr. Suzette Goldmon for 30 years. On May 28th, we have 2 young adult daughters, Krista and Patrice. Those 3 ladies are really the joy of my life. And the Lord really brought me to Lane. That may sound a little trite to some, but it really was a part of God's plan for my life and the next step in my journey, walking the path that God has designed for me.
Well, I am Logan Hampton, and certainly as you can hear from these folks, it's just been my great delight to join them in this labor here. I came to Lane in the summer of 2014. I was elected president and had been working in higher ed and serving a church. And so Lane College presented for me an opportunity to combine my 2 loves, my 2 passions, the ministry of salvation and the ministry of education. And as you all have heard me say many, many times, you know, it's my, I guess, passion in life to challenge folks I'm engaged with and the students to be saved and educated, so they get paid in all the ways that salvation and education pay.
Oh yeah, that's a good thing. So we have a really great panel, so I'm just going to jump straight on in. So how has studying the civil rights movement impacted your lives? Doc, you want to go first?
Sure.
We won't always make you go first.
So I think for me, one of the great joys of working at a historically black college, having gone to a historically black university as an undergrad, is that the notion of receiving an education is that one is educated to go back and serve the community. And so for me, the legacy of the civil rights movement is this idea that we are always pushing forward towards justice and equality where we don't see it. And we know that if we are able to serve and uplift anyone that it really has a broader impact on a larger community and the larger society. And I think for me, that is the essence of civil rights, is that when we think about justice and oppression, it works both ways, right? Those who we see are oppressed clearly do not have freedom, but those who are doing the oppressing are not free either. And so when we talk about civil rights, we're looking for freedom for everyone. We want everyone to be free from the evils of oppression.
Yeah, I mean, studying, I mean, that question just took me back to my early days in the profession, higher education. And the summer, right between a couple jobs, and I was in my late 20s. And I just decided to read King's work that summer. And as I started to read it, I just was struck by the fact that there I was, a mid-level student affairs professional, struggling to try to learn my way in the bowels of an institution of higher learning. And at the time, I was the same age as Dr. King was when he was leading the Montgomery bus boycott. And I was just taken aback by it. And then I just started to just really pay attention to his life, and I thought, he was young.
It was like so inspirational, yeah.
Even in the fact, I mean, even when he died at 39, he's young. I mean, we look at those pictures of him, and often they're granular. And so we look at him and think this was an elderly man, but no, he was a young man, and he started young, and so in his I Have Dreams speech, he has this line about the fierce urgency of now, and so for me, it just kind of set me on fire to just get about doing God's business now, not waiting to, sometime after I had all of the degrees that I was looking for, had some level of maturity. It's like, no, I'll begin right now doing those things that that God is calling me to do on behalf of kingdom building.
I kind of honed in on that word study as well, but from a little different perspective. I'm not sure I would say that I have actually just studied the civil rights movement. I'm certainly a product of the civil rights movement. And I've done some reading and some listening, both from media, but also from people who were a part of the experience. And one of the things that the civil rights movement has done for me is it has helped me to really develop an appreciation for African Americans and other poor and marginalized people with respect to just the resiliency, the determination. It has made me a better student, a lifelong learner, because when I look at the people who were actively engaged, and certainly those who were out front, that many of them were college students, and they were undergirded by pastors and leaders and educators, and so those things are really important. The other thing that it's done for me is that it has helped me to really grow and grasp and develop an appreciation for how many other people were involved in the movement beyond Dr. King. So often we lift up Dr. King, but there were so many other people who were actively engaged, and it just simply says to me that we all have a role.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you so much, but we have to go straight to a commercial. So we'll be right back after these commercial breaks.
Welcome to Lane College, home of the Dragons, a place for innovation, dedication, and excellence. Lane has a community filled with students who wish to achieve in the classroom and in life. Lane College is a stepping stone for a successful career. With our mission to transform, liberate, and celebrate our students, we create a learning environment that is inclusive to all. Here at Lane, our students have a chance to learn from professors from all different backgrounds and walks of life. Students have the opportunity to expand on their passions and grow both spiritually and intellectually. At Lane College, we believe in providing students with a well-rounded education that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives. Come to Lane College, where we have the power of potential.
Lucy got the Harry fraud.
On a journey with us to a world connecting you to your college. With a world that is changing at a rapid pace and is technology driven, the Mass Communication Department provides valuable news and information to the public, providing commentary, entertaining through film, radio, television. You can count on the Mass Communications Dragons to keep you on your toes and in the know of the latest activities going on campus, on all social sites. WLCD, the voice of the Dragons.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome back to Live LA. I'm Keyontae Wallace, and we're back with this marvelous episode. So we're going to get back into these questions. Which one of King's teachings impacted you the most?
Well, as I said, one of the things that was challenging for me was that whole notion of the fierce urgency of now. Where King uses it to challenge the status quo and to suggest that we ought not wait for some sort of gradualism to enjoy the rights that were promised by the founders of our country, but that we ought to benefit in the present. And so for me, and just in my life, that was just a motivator in all of the things that I did. So I'd offer that. I mean, that's certainly not one of the principles, and often a hidden phrase, I think, to some extent in King's speech, but for me, it's a great motivator.
I would say for me, it would definitely be the letter from the Birmingham City Jail. And there was an experience around that. I was in graduate school, and my professor was an ethicist who's now deceased, Glenn Stassen, and myself and 2 or 3 other black students went to him and said, we don't think that our Christian ethics class is appropriate and representative of the things that we want to learn. And so he basically had a separate class just for us. And one of the texts that we studied was the letter from the Birmingham City Jail. And so I appreciated the impact that King had on my professor and his response in terms of saying, you have made a valid complaint, and in order to show you that I take you seriously, I'm going to create this separate class for you all where we can richly dialogue about these texts that are important to you. And I had never seen King, I had seen him as a civil rights leader before then, but I hadn't really seen him as a theologian, right, a thinking man, an ethicist. And so that letter has such clear strategies for practices for justice and equality. And so to study those with my classmates and with this professor, it really, for me, demonstrated the love ethic that King preached in that community we formed together and studied that text.
Interesting. That is the exact same writing, speech, if you will, that impacted me the most, I think, is his letter from the Birmingham jail. In part because if you look at Dr. King's life, one of the things that permeates his life is this notion that he was doing God's work, that he was thrust into this movement in ways that were designed to ensure that there was an emphasis placed on not just setting people free, but dealing with systemic and institutional policies that trapped people in poverty and kept them there, that diminished the quality of their lives, that in some ways dehumanized individuals. And he saw that as being a part of his Christian heritage and of his work. And so the idea that he was doing God's work comes through clearly in that letter. That letter was actually in response to some other clergy who had really attacked him and called him an outsider and was wondering what did he he have to do with the people in Birmingham, because he didn't live there. And his notion was that when people are, in fact, it was in that letter where he made the famous statement that a threat to justice anywhere, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so he was just really trying to articulate that when people were suffering, it didn't matter if he was from that place or not, but because he was doing God's will, he had a responsibility to respond to those who in some ways did not have the ability or the capacity to help themselves.
So I just want to add also, I mean, I was inspired also by, in King's speech, the I Have a Dream speech, which is interesting to me sometimes. I think this, I think there's this concern in our community that is all that King is the dream and the dream speech. But it was really more than just a dream. I mean, it was painting a vision of, and a picture of what America could be and should be, in a way that we are yet attempting to live up to those standards now. I mean, each generation, to some extent, we are again helping and challenging each generation to value and judge not by the color of the skin, but by the content of the character. It looks different. I mean, we get different enemies. I mean, now I think perhaps it's persons in the Muslim community, perhaps in some respects it's persons in the gay, lesbian, bisexual community. We get different enemies, but yet and still we're yet evaluating persons by their exterior, as opposed to evaluating them by the content of their character, who they are, the essence of who they are. And I think King pulls us and challenges us to do that.
That's really great. I actually never thought of it that way. I guess you could say that's pretty good. So Dr. King, he was a part of several movements, and several movements have developed today that have been inspired by him, such as the youth movement, the nonviolence 365, the 50 Forward, and Black Lives Matter. So how impactful do you feel those are today?
I think it remains to be seen how impactful those movements are. It reminds me of a statement that I made earlier, that how many people were impacted, how many people were involved, the principles that Dr. King espoused, and not just Dr. King, but other strong leaders that he surrounded himself with in the civil rights era, during the movement and beyond. And so I think right now it remains to be seen how impactful those movements will be. The one difference that I see in many of those movements when compared to the civil rights movement, and certainly Dr. King's leadership, is the lack of organization, the lack of grassroots organization that enables a sustained momentum where people identify what the real issues are. I mean, Dr. King and the others who work with him in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference laid out some principles that you first must get enough information and data to understand what the real problem is, and then you have to negotiate to see if people are going to actually work with you. And so those movements need to take on some of that type of planning and structure in order to make a more significant impact.
I think one thing that encourages me, particularly in light of the shooting in Florida, is that there seems to be this identification across racial lines among young people around this issue of gun violence. So I was very encouraged in terms of the stories that I saw with the recent march, in terms of recognizing that both in terms of these sort of mass shooting incidents, but then ongoing violence in some of our major cities, that there is a recognition that we are all vulnerable, which to me harkens back to King and the Poor People's Movement, to recognize that really the challenge is across racial lines. And if we work together and galvanize our efforts, there's this sense that we can do something that will benefit all of us.
Okay. Well, we'll be right back with segment 3 after these commercials. Stay tuned.
on a journey with us to a world connecting you to your college. With a world that is changing at a rapid pace and is technology driven, the Mass Communication Department provides valuable news and information to the public, providing commentary, entertaining through film, radio, television. You can count on the Mass Communications Dragons to keep you on your toes and in the know of the latest activities going on campus, on all social sites. WLCD, the voice of the Dragons.
Why are you doing all this speeding? What time you gotta be there, huh? You ain't James Bond. You ain't some GTA character. You are not on Fast and Furious, okay? This is real life, and you are a normal pedestrian. Look at a speed sign, all right? Turn off that radio. Pay attention so you don't end up killing somebody like this fool almost did to me. This message is sponsored by Lane College, the power of potential. And remember, drive carefully.
Welcome to Lane College, home of the Dragons, a place for innovation, dedication, and excellence. Lane has a community filled with students who wish to achieve in the classroom and in life. Lane College is a stepping stone for a successful career. With our mission to transform, liberate, and celebrate our students, we create a learning environment that is inclusive to all. Here at Lane, our students have a chance to learn from professors from all different backgrounds and walks of life. Students have the opportunity to expand on their passions and grow both spiritually and intellectually. At Lane College, we believe in providing students with a well-rounded education that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives. Come to Lane College, where we have the power of potential.
The world will never rise to its full moral or political or even social maturity until racism is totally eradicated.
Welcome back to Live at Lane. I'm Keyontae Wallace, and we're back at it again. So we're going to just jump into these questions. Have any of you guys participated in any form of activism? And if so, what type of activism have you guys been involved in?
Yeah, I've participated in a number of marches over the years for political reasons, for educational purposes. I've done letter writing campaigns to our elected officials. Done, I guess I do quite a bit of that even today, as I attempt to be heard as a college official and talking about the benefits and the value of higher education and higher education, education particularly in the historically black college space. So I think in our lives, when you say activism, and as educators, it's who we are. We are yet making the case for education. We don't get time off. We don't get the space off. In fact, I'd almost just say that's our life. That's who we are. When you work in this space, you are challenged to challenge those who are the decision makers, those who are the funders, to continue to consider this activity that we do of educating the youth of our communities and the youth of our cities in America, of preparing them to sustain the democracy. Our lives are advocacy by design.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. I don't know that I would use the word activist to describe myself. I previously worked as a community artist and community organizer in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I've been involved in activist organizations, I guess you could say, when I was in college. I remember in particular one organization I was involved with that worked with African American youth, and we had some activities that were going on during the Million Man March. And so more than that, though, I think for me, like Dr. Hampton said, it's this notion of the larger trajectory of my life and my life purpose. And again, particularly in the context of historically black colleges and universities, it is an ingrained commitment to see African American children and youth flourish. And then as an educator, to instill in another generation of young people of all ages, but at Lane, predominantly African American youth, the intellect, the talent, the skill, the commitment to go back and improve their communities, to look at the systems in which they find themselves, and to make sure that those systems are behaving justly and appropriately towards others. And then to be willing to confront and change those systems if they're not. And again, to have a toolkit, a set of intellectual, spiritual, and emotional tools to make those changes.
Yeah, I thought about that. Activism is a rather strong word, I think, for me, when I think about just the things that I do. I mean, Dr. Hampton and Dr. Rogers have both talked about some things that we do that I consider to just be a part of the work, a part of the job. And so when I think of activism within the context of this discussion, you know, the first thing that comes to my mind is being out engaged in marches and things of that sort. But I think because of the success of particularly the 60s civil rights movement, that activism looks a little different today. We have to also think about taking full advantage of the doors and the opportunities that are open to us. And so I can remember as early as my oldest daughter getting into elementary school, joining the Parent-Teacher Association because there were so few African American students who were allowed to become enrolled in the Talented and Gifted program. And I thought that the best way to do that is to be around the table and to be a part of the strategy sessions. I remember being part of fundraising committees for an organization in Durham, North Carolina that did just a great deal of work around helping to ensure that African Americans understood the election process and that people were being elected who would represent the interests of the full community. And so there have been some involvement and some engagement and in ways that may not put me on the front lines and get my name in the newspaper and those kinds of things. But I think that we also have to think about what can we do every day to challenge the systems and structures that lock people out of opportunities.
Okay, and I guess a question to piggyback off of what you just said, and I want you all to be completely honest with everything that's been going on. Do you feel that Dr. King would be satisfied with our progress of race division since his death?
I would say definitely not. And the area that comes to mind, particularly in terms of King's legacy, is education. I think when we think about commerce today and capitalism, and particularly online shopping, if you will, you know, as Black people, we have access to things that we didn't have access to before in terms of capitalism and being able to purchase things and go into any store that we want. But in terms of education, I would say that the access to a high quality education is still an issue where there's a great divide in our society.
I would say King would be, I'd say it'd be mixed. I think he would be pleased with some of the progress that has happened in our community. I mean, we've made some great strides in our community. I think he would been delighted with the election of President Barack Obama to be president of the United States, and that Sasha and Malia virtually grew up right before our very eyes, living in the White House, a house that was built by slaves. I think he would be amazed at how African Americans have really dominated professional sports and entertainment. I think he would be pleased with some of the progress as it relates to education and the growing African American middle class. But I think I'd be less than frank, as you invited us to be, I think he would still have some concerns about militarism and the growing militarism. I think he would be absolutely, I mean, he would be right on the front lines with mass incarceration and the fact that young African American boys 1 in 3 will end up in prison on parole or probation of some sort, and I think he would be challenging us to challenge the status quo as it relates to that. So I want to say, yes, there are some things, there are some advances, and yes, we have lived out the dream. In some instances, I mean, there are some African Americans who are uber rich. And I think it's because Dr. King opened some doors. As Dr. Goldmon talked about, doors opening. We had a number of African Americans who walked through those doors. So I think he would be pleased in those areas, but we have so much work yet to be done.
Still work to do.
Dr. Goldmon?
Yeah, I think he would be happy with some of the changes with respect to the laws that are on the books. The overt discriminatory practices that were legal that he was fighting against. I think he would be somewhat disappointed in the lack of our consistent engagement in taking full advantage of the opportunities that are made available to us. And I think he would be extremely disappointed and quite frankly still angry with the divide in income and wealth in this country, and in particular poverty. We don't talk about it that much, but the eradication of poverty was a major issue for Dr. King because he understood that income and wealth gives people opportunities to live a life that is more equitable and just, and that when you have wealth, when you have access to wealth, you can really influence so many things, and he understood that very well.
Well, that's going to be the end of this episode of Live at Lane. And I'm just going to say, Martin Luther King had a dream, and soon this society will be able to achieve that dream. Thank you.
I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.